Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to use ViewState in a WebForm application. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio and create a new project. And we're going to make a ASP.NET web application. And I'm going to save it on the desktop, and I will call this ViewState demo. We're going to make this a web form application. Well, we're going to make this an empty application, but we're going to add the folders and references for a web form application. So first we're going to add to our project a web form. And I'm going to call it ViewState demo page. And we're going to drag and drop a few things on here. So let's get from our toolbox. And if you can't see your toolbox, you can go to View. And under View, all these menus exist. So if for some reason you lost access to it, just go to View Toolbox and it'll show back up. What we're going to do is bring in a text box. And a couple labels. And a button. If you want to see what this ends up looking like, you can look at it from the design view. And you could drag and drop as well. And the nice thing about the design view is it gives us the ability to set our formatting in kind of a Microsoft Windows approach. You notice I'll hit paragraph tag here, and when I go back to source, you'll see that it'll introduce all these paragraph tags to kind of separate everything out. You could also type this in directly if you know your HTML well enough that you can just do it from memory. So what we want to do is make it so that when we double click this button, we display some information. For now, we'll just do something simple. I'll double click and it opens up this code behind page. If another way of getting to that is if you go to your ASPX page, you can actually see it here. It says ASPX.cs and designer.cs. That's that page. And by double clicking on the button, what I did is it actually added this button event. You can also see your events by looking at the properties. for your button, and you'll notice that you have a number of icons up here. Right now we're looking at the properties icon. If I click on this lightning bolt, it shows me the events, and we can see that that event is there. If I were to delete this and go back and delete that, the button wouldn't have an event anymore. Another ways you can add events is you can double click on the event and it'll show up. And you'll notice that if you look at the source, you have this on-click event that shows up. So there's multiple ways of working with controls. You can either work from the design view. You could, of course, write everything from scratch, which I don't recommend. So we delete everything and save it back to normal. Or you can double click it. So you can double click in the design view. You can double click in the properties. Or in the source, you could actually say on click equals and double click here on create new event. And what it will do is in the code behind page, it'll stub out that event for you. So Visual Studio does a lot of things for you. And just to show that this worked, I'm going to take a label 1, and each of these controls has a property, and in particular for things like labels and text boxes, it has a text property. And if I do that, it should, when it runs, display clicked when I click the button. So we'll just play around with this page for a second here just to see what it does. And here's our web page. Here's the text label. When I click on this button, you'll see this top label change, and you can see it says clicked. And what happens is actually when you click this button, a request is sent back to the server. The server then rebuilds the page that it displayed, which this ASPX page really is showing what the server is going to show as your page. But in addition, because on the post back the button was clicked, it'll also run this code after it renders the page. And what this code does is makes that text button say clicked. Another thing we can do is we could actually take the text box and render it in the label. So if I do this, it's going to take the text from the text box 1 and place it in the label. So if I click it like this, it's empty. And every time I change the text box, it's posting it to the label. So in many ways, what we do when we build a web form application is we design our page, put the controls that we want on the page using combination of HTML and dragging controls from our toolbox, or just typing them from memory if you remember them. Actually, IntelliSense can help you out. For example, if I hit ASP, I have all the objects just listed here. The hard part is that you then have to remember all the fields you have to set. But the IntelliSense, again, will help you out. And says it needs a run add attribute. So you can actually kind of use IntelliSense to help you out if you want to just write from the code directly. And after a while you probably will. So here we have the second button. It doesn't do anything, but we can see that it's working. So after you make your form and you drag your buttons on it, then you handle events. And there are many different types of events, not just click events. You have, if I look at this button, we can see that there's a click, there's a data binding, there's several different events that are here. If I look at the text box, there's some init and load events, and then the text changed event. So there's a number of different events you can handle, and by handling them, you make the page behave the way you want. So what we're going to do is also, let's take this label 2 text. And we're going to look at something called ViewState. And what ViewState is it's basically a collection object. It's a dictionary. And you can provide any key you want. In this case, we're just going to make up a key called state1. And we're going to store whatever values in this text box. We're going to store it in the view state, and then we're going to display what's in the view state in label 2. And it looks like it did the same thing, but there is some great utility in this, in that, let's say that whenever we load this page is when I set this text box. And so the only thing my button's going to do is just put the text that I have in the text box in the view state. And then I'm going to create another button. And then what the second button is going to do is it's just going to create a postback. It's actually not going to be associated with any code. One of the checks we will need to do is check to say if because it's possible that view state has not been established yet. And if I click this first button, nothing happens. Now if I put in, so both of them right now are set to basically an empty string. So as long as I have something in here, and I click the second button, remember the second button is just doing a post back. And so this first label is being shown what's in the text box. Notice that the second label is showing what's in ViewState. In fact, let's make that a little clearer. And in our button, we're going to change the label, or we're going to show what it says. And so I'm going to put in test, and I'm going to store the view state. And every time we do a post back, it's going to do this. Now if I put test, I change the text box and just do a post back, notice that the top is showing what's in the text box, but view state has stayed the same. If I were to delete this and do text, the text box is just showing what's in here, but the view state label is showing that view state is saved. And when I first click store view state, it doesn't do anything, because if we look at the order in which operations are done, we can see that this will store the view state, but it doesn't update the view. And so it does this, and when it comes back through, so it does the page load happens first, and it has nothing to do with the order here. It has to do with the lifecycle events. Page load is always done first, and then other events occur. So in this case, what happens is, in fact, I could just do this just to show it. So I reverse the order in the, and of course C# doesn't really care what order you put events or methods in, but just to show it, I'll put test 1 in, I'll do a text box, a post back, and you see that the text box is reported. Nothing's stored in view state yet. If I store that in view state, the page load event was just run. This button click event has actually occurred, but it's not being displayed yet until I do another post back, and then it's displayed. So one of the odd things about web form development is you have to pay attention to the order in which events run. And it has to do with the life cycle of a web page, which means page load happens first and then all of your other events happen. If you wanted this to display, you would actually have right away, what you would have to do is update your label right after you change the view state. So you'd have to do something like this. And now it updates right away because we put code in here to update label to right away upon the button click. So we use view state in order to keep hold of values. And if we didn't do that, what would happen is there'd be no way for our page to know what it was placed here before. If we look at the source for this web page, what you'll notice is there's a very interesting hidden field. This input, which is a type hidden, has this thing called ViewState. In actuality, everything that's stored here in this ViewState lives inside of this series of random looking text. In actuality, the information is stored here in a serialized manner. This is basically just a big number. And the reason why we need this is because the pages in a WebForm application don't actually exist after they're submitted. So the typical life cycle looks like the following. We have a pre-init, init, init complete methods, and then here's our load method. And embedded in here, you also have other events that are basically the events you create. Each time a page is rendered, it goes through each of these events. So when postbacks happen, it's like the page gets built and then thrown away every time a postback occurs. And so over the course of the time your user is interacting with a web form application, it kind of looks like this. So we get a page gets created, they click a button, it comes back for a postback, the page gets created at the server, served up, and then destroyed. Then the user clicks on something else, and it just keeps going through this cycle. We can represent this stateless architecture with this kind of diagram. If you think of just a regular application that lives on your computer, like a Windows application, a user interacts with a control on one of those applications, the program responds to the event, the user views the response, and you just kind of go through the cycle. Everything stays in memory the whole time. With a web application, the user's client is a separate application. So what happens is the server when the user requests a web page, the server will load that ASPX page into memory. It runs all of those lifecycle events in order to create the page, which is really just a string of HTML characters. And then the server sends back that page and actually gets everything out of memory. It garbage collects everything. The user views the results because now they've got that page that came over the internet. They may interact with control on that page on their client. And at this time, this page actually doesn't exist on the server anymore. When they click on that event, the client, i.e. their web browser, will create a new request, and that gets sent back to the server where the page gets created again. Because the page gets thrown out of memory between every single key click, we say that ASP is stateless. And we have to provide everything that's needed to generate that page with the request. Our view state is actually a way of preserving information from one postback to the next. We can create these keys and store information in this view state collection, and it will be, what happens is basically the page gets created and the information is stored between each postback in this hidden inputs called view state. So we're passing this information back and forth between the two applications. This works. It's inherently inefficient because we're sending a lot of information back and forth between the server and the client. So generally speaking, you want to keep this view state object as small as possible. And better than passing in a lot of text and objects through this, what you normally want to do is maybe send a number that then is an index to information stored perhaps in a database. So that's how we use ViewState. Thank you very much.